The dueling over America's economic future heats up big time. Today we talk with top officials from both the Obama and Romney campaigns about that. Hi, I'm Seib, and welcome to the inaugural edition of the D.C. Bureau from the Wall Street Journal. We're going to go straight out to Chicago, and we're joined there by David Axelrod, Senior Advisor to the Obama campaign. David, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here. Congratulations on your new venture here.
Thank you, appreciate it. You know, David, I think the political event of the week was the president's speech. Long, detailed, quite interesting look at the economic differences between the president and Mitt Romney.
I have said that this is the defining issue of our time, and I mean it. I said that this is a make or break moment for America's middle class, and I believe it. The decisions we make in the next few years on everything from debt and taxes to energy and education will have an enormous impact on this country.
I'm curious, first of all, though, why you felt this was a speech you all had to make at this point.
Well, it's a speech that we'd planned for quite some time. You know, Jerry, and you've been around this business a long time, and we've seen it in spades in recent weeks. These campaigns can get mired down into a contest of tactics and daily events. And what the president wanted to do was really lay out for the American people the stakes and the choices here. We really have an opportunity for a great debate. We have two very distinctive visions about how we build an economy for the future, how we revive the middle class in this country and make sure that people who work hard can get ahead. You know, Governor Romney's view is basically we should go back to doing what we were doing in the last decade, large tax cuts, particularly skewed to people at the top end, fewer rules for Wall Street and other actors in the economy, but particularly Wall Street. And he thinks that will produce better results than they did the last time when our economy crashed, deficits exploded. We're still digging out from that. The president has a different view. We should move forward in a balanced way, dealing with our debt, but also investing in those things that we need to grow. Education, innovation, energy, infrastructure, the building blocks of a healthy economy and a strong middle class. And I think this is a great debate, and it's one that the American people deserve.
Were you worried that the Romney campaign was succeeding in turning this more into a referendum on Obama rather than a choice between Obama and Romney?
You know, I've never believed that that was going to be the case. The fact of the matter is the American people make a choice when they pick a president. They choose a leader, but they also choose a path. And what the president did today and what he's going to continue to do throughout this campaign is make clear what those choices are and what those directions are. I think what you're going to find is people are going to see in what the president's proposing much greater hope for the future than the idea of going back to what we were doing back in the last decade under the last administration when it ended so badly for the economy and the middle class.
You know, some people, I think, were looking this week for perhaps new policy initiatives out of the White House, out of the president, to get the job situation changed between now and November. You didn't have that in the speech this week. Are those things coming, or are we pretty much where we can be in policy terms?
Well, let's be clear. The president's proposed a series of steps that would get people working right now. I heard a Republican operative say today, well, we're kind of rooting for a bad economy for the next 4 months because that'll help Governor Romney get elected, and perhaps that's the philosophy that governs Congress right now. The only time they seem to be sitting on their hands unless there's some bad economic news, and then they take their hands out so they can high-five each other. What we really need is action. And the president's going to continue to press to refinance, to have a bill to get the red tape out of the way so people with good credit, responsible homeowners, but underwater homes can refinance under today's rates. Help small businesses with a hiring tax credit. And yes, rehire teachers and firefighters and police who we've lost by the hundreds of thousands over the last couple of years, even as you've seen the private sector produce 4.3 million jobs. You know, Governor Romney said, as you know, on Friday, we don't need any more teachers, we don't need any more police or firefighters. He said that was the lesson of the Wisconsin election. Even Scott Walker said that wasn't the lesson of the of the Wisconsin election. And by the way, if Governor Romney thinks that the way to a better economic future is to have fewer teachers, I think he's in a very small minority in this country and among people who think about the economy.
You know, but David, this really amounts to a giant debate over taxes more than anything else, doesn't it? I mean, this logjam would be broken if there was some consensus on taxes, and there just isn't one in the country, or at least not in Washington.
Well, I think there is I think there's a large majority in the country who understand that we have to make choices. And if they had to make a choice between, Governor Romney proposes an additional, on top of the Bush tax cuts, another $250,000 tax cut for millionaires. And he would pay for that by slashing education and other investments that we need to grow. I think most of the country believes that that's not the right path. There may not be a consensus in Washington. I think in Congress, people adhere to the same philosophy that Governor Romney's expressed when he said that he wouldn't even accept $1 of new revenue for $10 in cuts. But that kind of dogmatic opposition is an impediment to our progress. I agree with Governor Jeb Bush, who said that doesn't make sense and that we have to be willing to work these issues through. And I hope that his commonsensical approach infects the rest of the Republican Party, but I'm not encouraged by what I see from Governor Romney and the leaders of Congress.
Do you worry that when the president talks about raising taxes on the rich, that message may be sinking in with the not quite so rich, the upper middle class, which is a pretty good demographic for President Obama in 2008? Is there a danger of scaring those voters off along the way?
He's talking about raising taxes, Jerry, on 2 to 3% of the American people, and the American people understand that we have to make choices. We simply can't afford to continue these high-end tax cuts, and it's not a matter of being punitive to people at the top. It's a matter of how we grow this economy and how we bring our deficits under control in a responsible and balanced way. Most of the well-to-do people that I know, most of the people who've done very well in this economy over the last 12 years, want to help. They want to contribute. They want to be a part of the solution, but they've acquired these zealous guardians in the Congress on the Republican side who insist that they're not going to have to, that they shouldn't have to contribute anymore. And I think until we get over that hurdle, it's going to be hard to solve these problems.
David, let me ask you one final question about campaign mechanics, if I could. There's a super PAC advantage that the Republicans seem to be developing in this campaign. There's always been an assumption you would have an overall fundraising advantage. What do you think the money picture is going to look like, and what can you do to offset a super PAC a move on the Republican side that seems to outstrip what Democrats can do in that area?
Well, let me be very clear, Jerry. I think without question, the president will be the first president in our lifetime who's going to be outspent in an election. Once the floodgates were opened by the Citizens United ruling, and these super PACs and faux super PACs can raise unlimited amounts of money, 75% of which is undisclosed, you change the dynamic. We expect about $1 billion to be raised and spent by these super PACs. Just today, Sheldon Adelson, a billionaire casino owner out of Nevada, said he may give as much as $100 million to the super PACs to try and defeat the president.
But you're going to have
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's just because, but you're going to have an individual donor advantage probably, and you're going to have a union money advantage. Isn't this going to be pretty much an even playing
field? I think there's no doubt it's going to net out strongly in favor of the Republicans. I am proud of the fact that we have such a robust fundraising base, 98% of which are small donors. Our average donation is $51. But consider this, Adelson wrote a $10 million check to Romney's super PAC. It would take 181,000 of our average donations just to match that one contribution. So, it's a matter of concern for us. I think we can overcome it, but it's a real factor in this campaign, and I don't think anybody knows yet what the impact of it will be.
David, it's a long road ahead. I hope we can talk as we head down that road and see you again on the D.C. Bureau.
I look forward to it, Jerry. Thank you very much.
So Mitt Romney, of course, is campaigning above all on his ability to create jobs.
I want to make it once again, America once again, the most attractive place in the world for job creators. And it's not just because I love job creators, it's because I love jobs. I want more good jobs for the American people, and I want such competition for good workers that salaries and wages go up so people make more money. I want to help the middle class of America, and I'm going to do it.
To talk about that a little bit, we're turning to Kevin Madden, Senior Advisor to the Romney campaign. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You know, a lot of this conversation in the campaign so far has been about what Barack Obama has failed to do to create jobs. When do you turn the conversation more to what Mitt Romney will do to create jobs rather than what Barack Obama has not done?
Well, I think that was a large part of the primary process, and it's also going to be a really important part of this general election. You know, oftentimes during campaigns, we oftentimes hear criticism about, well, I'm not hearing a lot of specifics.
Exactly.
One of the things we heard during the campaign was that the Governor Romney, during the primary campaign, was we were offering too many specifics. If you remember, Governor Romney put out a 160-page booklet with a 59-point plan about what he would specifically do to help move the economy forward. Addressed everything across all the different issue silos, from healthcare to energy to trade to spending to entitlement reform. So Governor Romney, I think during the next couple of weeks, you're going to see him talk in very specific terms about what he would do on all of those issues, because all of them have an important part of laddering up to a bigger economic argument we're having in this country about how do we create jobs. So if you go industry by industry, sector by sector, issue by issue related to from everything from spending and deficits to entitlement reform to healthcare and energy, Governor Romney is going to have a very specific message that he delivers to voters about what he would do differently.
And what is the role of government in this? I mean, you're obviously making a case that the Obama view of government is that it's too intrusive. What is the role of government?
Well, I think that is one of the clarifying debates that we've already seen during this campaign. It's going to be an important question for voters when they go to the polls in November. Do you believe that fundamentally government is the engine for economic development, or do you believe that the private sector and the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people is what needs to be helped in order to have businesses, both big and small, grow? And I think we've seen that debate this week.
We've created 4.3 million jobs over the last 27 months, over 800,000 just this year alone. The private sector is doing fine.
I think that is entirely at odds with where many American business owners, both big and small, feel, particularly as it relates to the policies and the regulations and the taxation that we've seen over the last 3.5 years. And then you've seen President Obama try to make a very aggressive argument that what we need to do is put more money into the private sector, whether it's infrastructure or spend more money on government workers in order to grow the economy. So I think those are very big differences that are going to be litigated as part of this general election, and it's going to be an important test for the voters.
You know, the other part of the dialogue in the recent days has been the Obama critique of the Romney record as a job creator in Massachusetts. 47th out of 50 Massachusetts ranked as a job creator when he was governor. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the most important response is, remember, when Governor Romney came in, the unemployment rate was 5.6%, and when he left office, it was 4.7%. Thousands of new jobs were created. The governor came into a very dismal economic environment in Massachusetts, a state with an 85% Democrat legislature, a state with a reputation for big government and big government spending, and he tried to change that culture. And what he did was he put in place the reforms both on the spending side as well as incentivizing businesses to come there, relocate, and hire more people. And so I think that was an important part of his record. And then on the number of 47, look, I think the Obama campaign, we fully expect that they're going to offer a distorted and discolored view of the governor's record. But when he came into office, Massachusetts was 50th in job creation. And when he left, they had vaulted themselves to 32nd. And I think that's a vast improvement. It's a record that the governor is very proud to run on. And it'd be a record that if President Obama had, he would be running on that record. Right now, he's not running on his record. He's running an attack campaign based on trying to discredit Governor Romney, and I think right now it's being rejected.
You know, one of the clouds hanging over the economy, everybody would agree, is Europe. What would Governor Romney do different about making the European problem less of a drag on the U.S. economy?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about Europe right now is it's a cautionary tale in many ways about the direction that this country is headed. If we continue to follow the vision that President Obama has, which is putting more faith and more emphasis in just spending money on the government and growing the size of government, that it's going to create a problem. It's going to stifle the economic growth that we have in the private sector, and we're not going to be able to see the job creation and the economic growth that we need in order to sustain our economy. And I think that's one of the differences right now. Obviously, we have to work with our allies there to make sure that the debt conflagration doesn't get any worse, that it doesn't affect world markets in a way. I mean, we have so many big businesses that depend on European buying power in order for our economy to do well. So I think that's something that the governor is fully is bearing in mind as he makes his argument. But Europe very much is a cautionary tale. If we continue down the path that we're going with President Obama, we could end up like Europe. We have to make sure that we don't spend more money than we take in, and then we have to incentivize the private sector to grow and create more economic growth.
You know, you indicated at the outset that there is still some more fleshing out of the Romney economic message to be done. One of the areas that has to be addressed still, I think, probably, is the question of his tax plan and what he would do to broaden the tax base to take away some tax breaks so that when he lowers rates, it's revenue neutral, it's not adding to the deficit. When does that happen? When do we find out whose tax breaks Governor Romney wants to take away?
Well, I think Governor Romney has indicated that he wants to work with both parties, and he wants to bring all parties to the table and talking about how do we change the current tax regime right now so that we can create a broader base, and that we can have a tax structure that makes us more competitive around the globe. One of the issues that Governor Romney has talked about, both in the primary and I think it's going to be a debate for the general election, is what do we do on the corporate rate. Right now we have one of the highest corporate rates in the in the industrial world, and that's somehow, I think that the way that structure has been put in place has really hurt our ability to compete around the world. So and I think there are many Democrats and Republicans that agree on that issue. If you work with anybody up on Capitol Hill, they'll tell you that they believe we need to work on that in order to have long-term growth, better, a more competitive tax structure in the country.
But do we find out at some point who Governor Romney thinks ought to be getting less of a tax break to make this all add up in terms of revenue neutrality?
Well, I think that's something that you're going to have to work out with a potential Romney presidency. But I think right now with the American people is they during this campaign, they really want to hear what your vision is for the country. They really want to hear in broad terms what you hope to do, what you hope to achieve with your tax and regulatory proposals.
Let me ask you a final question about something quite different, Syria. Things aren't getting better in Syria, they're getting worse probably. What would Governor Romney do different? Does he want to arm the opposition? Would he do more than just arm the opposition to change the situation in Syria?
Well, one of the big criticisms that Governor Romney has had of President Obama's policy on Syria is that we've in many ways subcontracted American foreign policy to folks like Kofi Annan and others at the UN, for example, and that we need to take a much more assertive role in this process. Now, there are going to be a number of ways that we can do that, whether it is working very closely with opposition groups in order to aid them in some way. I think I leave that up to the foreign policy experts on what that aid should look like. But clearly what we've seen right now is that this president has, and this has been something that's been critical, and a lot of, this is criticism that has borne out of a lot of the foreign policy decisions and policies of this president, is that we've been leading from behind, that we haven't been as assertive as we need to be. So I think a President Romney would be much more assertive and would not be more prone to subcontract out American foreign policy.
Kevin Madden, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks. Long road ahead. Hope we can do it again.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
So, is there anything President Obama can do beyond just hope for an economic turnaround? We tackle that and some other topics in our political roundtable discussion coming up next.
People are giving him an extraordinary amount of benefit of the doubt about why we're here, how we got here.
It's all a thematic, vision, rhetorical game now.
They're not going to vote on what happened to their median wealth between 2007 and 2009. They're going to vote on jobs. They're going to vote on the overall state of the economy. They're going to vote on whether or not they think they want another 4 years of this.
All right, so it's pretty clear the word of the week, the word of the month, the word of the year is jobs, right? So here we are in June, the unemployment rate's 8.2%. Is there anything Obama can do, or is it baked in the cake?
Well, it's kind of apt, isn't it, really, Jerry, that we're, you know, the presidency that started, that was elected 4 years ago on a theme of hope, seems to be reduced now to hope in the remaining 6 months before the election to
hope
think
something happens,
something for the hope something happens to the economy. I mean, they are out of. It does look really like they're out of ammunition. I mean, they've done a stimulus. They've done, you know, the Federal Reserve has done a lot of stimulus. It can probably do a bit more. The Fed probably will do a bit more. But there's nothing in this pre-election period, given the politics in Washington and just how uncooperative everybody wants to be. There doesn't seem to be anything feasible that's going to get done. So they are reduced to hope.
Yeah. But there's these rumblings of discontent, which we've heard this week from a lot of the Democrats outside of the Obama camp, and it's sort of change your narrative. Don't look for jobs to rebound per se. Talk about the future. Talk about how you're going to fix the economy and kind of even fix the country. One thing you find a lot, I think, when you talk to voters and look at the polls and focus groups and like, is that people are giving him an extraordinary amount of benefit of the doubt about why we're here, how we got here, and they're wanting to know, okay, how are we going to get back to where we were before? And that's Romney's core message. I'm going to restore what we once were, and I think Obama needs to kind of grab some of that. What I'm going to make of it now.
Well, in fact, that's the Obama messages, right? I mean, you did a speech this week. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to take us back to where we were before. That's his core argument right now.
And the whole idea, I mean, when they were putting this speech together, there were people who wanted him to put in new ideas and talk about things that he could do about the economy, and everyone was just concluded there was nothing that he could actually say. So it's all a thematic vision, rhetorical game now. And his speech, you know, is talking about what his vision is for the future versus what Romney's vision is for the future, and how they're so different, and why he should.
And obviously, when an incumbent president's running for re-election, as everybody says, the election is in large part a referendum on the incumbent's record. And what is the record he's going to be running on? I think the message is it could have been worse, right? I mean, that's the message. The message is not, hey, things are great, the economy's going really well, we're creating really good, lots of jobs, as he rather unfortunately said last week, the private sector's doing fine. He can't run on that. He knows he can't run on that. He's got to run on two things. One, as you say, as he was in his speech this week, attacking Mitt Romney for, he's going to take us back to the bad old days. And secondly, saying, well, we could, if it hadn't been for what we've done, things would have been an awful lot worse. And I'm not sure that's a really compelling argument.
Not entirely, because when the Fed put out these numbers this week that said, household net assets had dropped so much, the Obama response, I think, was that all happened in 2007, 2008, and it's actually gotten better since 2009. But it is a hard argument to make, even if the statistics back you up.
People are not going to vote in November on what happened to media. I mean, even though it's an important statistic in real life for people, they're not going to vote on what happened to their median wealth between 2007 and 2009. They're going to vote on jobs. They're going to vote on the overall state of the economy. They're going to vote on whether or not they think they want another 4 years of this.
Well, that's the other piece of his argument, is not so much where things were, that it could have been worse, but it could be worse, meaning that if you vote in Mitt Romney, that it's going to be worse than it is now.
The other thing they're going to do is blame
the
other thing they're trying to do, of course, is blame the Europeans. I mean, it's all, I speak as a European here, so I'm kind of, feel a little vulnerable about this.
Right to me.
But it's all really the Germans' fault, which I think is, again, that's going to be really hard to make that stick. It's an interesting argument because it is reflected in Europe. The argument that's going on here about austerity versus stimulus is very much the discussion that's going on in Europe. But again, I don't think people are going to really listen to an argument that says, hey, everything was absolutely going fine until, the Spanish banks needed a big bailout and Germany's in this mess and Greeks having this election. People just don't buy that. They want to see something happen here.
The Peter Hart, our pollster, did a really interesting focus group this week out of Denver. And what really came, it was 12 people around a table. 10 of them had voted for Obama. 3 were saying that they were maybe going to do it again. But he asked a great question, which is, 6 months ago, what season was it, so to speak, in the economy, and what were you wearing? And most of the people basically were, it was starting to get warmer, I was down to a light jacket, and where are we now? Well, I'm about to take the jacket off. I think summer's about here. So in that crowd, there was actually a sense of optimism about where the economy was heading, but incredible sourness about Obama, which led me to believe, and I think this is sort of out there, that it's not necessarily the, are you better off 4 years ago than we are now, or are we better off now than 4 years ago, but what do you make of this person that you so loved 4 years ago, and has he done it for you? And for a lot of these people, it's like, he hasn't.
Right, but there are two things that I think the president's got going for him still. Now, one is that this is a different cycle. In other words, we would have said 10, 20 years ago, attitudes about the economy are getting locked in right now. Well, things move so fast now that there's a theory, and I think Peter Hart holds this theory that you can go much later, and people will change their minds, and maybe they'll say later, you know, it didn't look so good in June, but you know, it's September, and I'm now convinced that it is, because they're absorbing information so much more quickly. And the second thing is, I mean, let's face it, nobody's fallen in love with Mitt Romney yet, and that's going to carry him a long way if it continues, which is, I think, the Romney campaign's a big challenge. You know, make people like this guy and make him an acceptable alternative, and I don't think they're there yet on that.
You know, and the one thing that, to go to your point, that the White House really worries about is that word disappointment, is that when you hear Mitt Romney make this argument that he's a really nice guy and he's tried really hard but he's just not getting it done, that cuts right into the way people are feeling and gives them an excuse not to vote for him, and they're very concerned about that.
Yeah, this same focus group was exactly the sort of focus groups that American Crossroads and all these conservative groups built their advertising around, that a lot of these same swing states are now seeing, which is nice guy, we all fell for under his spell, just not quite up to the job, we're disappointed. It's this whole sense of disenchantment. But on the other hand, these same people around this table knew unbelievably little about Mitt Romney. The question is, can Obama fill in blanks there and insert things that they don't like, or will it in the end just be totally a referendum about Obama and the country ends up electing somebody?
He's got to make, I completely agree with you. He's got to make this about Mitt Romney. He's got to say, because I think it is just hard for him to run on that record, for all the reasons we've discussed. He can, however, run on the argument that you don't want to let this guy into the White House. You know, you may not have liked the last 4 years, but we'll hear more and more about Bain Capital. We'll hear more and more about his record as governor of Massachusetts. We'll hear, you know, what's the old line about Mitt Romney? That he reminds too many Americans of a guy who once fired them. You know, and I think there is something to that. People think there is something about that rather harsh, cruel businessman about Mitt Romney that could scare people.
And on that, we're just getting started.
Right.
The private sector is doing fine.
One of the worst economic records in the country.
So there's nothing subtle about this jobs debate, right? I mean, it's kind of all out there. They're not pretending that they kind of have similar policies. And I think that came through this week in the ads. And there are two of them we have teed up. We should just watch them, I think.
When Mitt Romney was governor, Massachusetts was number one in state debt. $18 billion in debt, more debt per person than any other state in the country. At the same time, Massachusetts fell to 47th in job creation, one of the worst economic records in the country. First in debt, 47th in job creation. That's Romney economics. It didn't work then, it won't work now.
The private sector is doing fine. The private sector is doing fine.
So out of touch, that's clear. Something you don't want to be this year is out of touch.
It's the battle of the untouchables.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, already just soon after that, Obama and his team came out with all this other stuff that Romney has said that made him look out of touch. Oh, he likes to fire people and all this kind of stuff. So it's the jobs numbers and that sort of stat stuff, and then there's the meta argument about who's the most out of touch with you know, the plight of the real people.
The one interesting thing about the Obama ad is that when he is talking about Mitt Romney running the state of Massachusetts years and years ago, it almost brings to mind the fact that he's running an economy now and underscores the problems that people are feeling and having, and you wonder if at a certain point, if he keeps talking about that, it draws more attention to what people are feeling about him.
I think that's exactly right. I think these ads that sort of focus on people's governors' records when they were governor, especially when they're some time ago, as you say, are often very, very ineffective. There's a lot of data for people to to absorb. I can remember in 1992, Bill Clinton running governor of Arkansas. I remember Bush running ads saying that Arkansas was the 50th in the nation in terms of education and income per head. I just don't think it really charms people. And I think exactly as you say, when the economy, the national economy, which really Obama is rightly or wrongly held responsible for, is not doing very well. It looks kind of desperate. But harking back to 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Right. The only number though, the Obama people want remembered out of that ad is 47. 47th out of 50 states. Everything else will wash out. But I think you're right. I do remember going to the Republican convention in 1992, and on every chair in the convention hall on the opening night was a little sign that read, "Failed governor of a small state." That's what they wanted people to remember about Bill Clinton, and that didn't, as you say, that didn't really work.
And I think it's also got to fit into some extent. The key with political messaging is it's got to fit in with what people already, their sort of prior assumptions or prejudices are about that person, and I don't think people, when people think of Massachusetts in this country, they don't necessarily think of it as being a heavily indebted state that's really not creating any jobs. They might have views about its politics, and that's probably what most people, especially in the South, think about Massachusetts. But they don't think of Massachusetts as a disaster. They think of it as just, they don't really think of it very much at all, very much at all as having any kind of political significance. So I think running that, trying to campaign on Romney's record in Massachusetts is going to be tough. I mean, I know Romney's going to try and do it partly himself. It's going to be selective, but it's going to be really hard to convince people that Romney was a disaster as governor of Massachusetts.
Well, they started out at the very beginning of this, head-to-head, beating on the whole Bain thing and saying this is a private equity guy, and then that didn't really work too well. So they've toggled over to basically telling people, oh, he wasn't just this, supposedly evil private equity guy, but he also ran a state. And even if the numbers might not be that good the way they've portrayed them, it still tells people that he was the governor of Massachusetts, which undercuts the Bain argument, and it just shows that they're kind of floundering around on how to portray the guy.
Well, and this, if you talk to them, they'll tell you that this is the resume portion of the program, that they're going to talk about his resume and get all that out there so that they can then hopefully move on to a debate about ideas, which is the debate they really want to have. I don't, whether or not that's going to be effective sort of remains to be seen. But
if you look in our poll, the Bain numbers are not so great. There may be more mileage to get out of Bain than Massachusetts here. I mean, particularly if you can somehow combine Bain and J.P. Morgan.
Look, if you think why Romney has these very, very high negatives, these big problems, he has these very high negatives in polls. Why is that? Is that because people think about him as governor of Massachusetts, or because they remember what they've heard about him as head of Bain?
Capitalist.
And I think the answer is pretty clear. It's the Bain stuff that's stuck, not anything he did while he was governor of Massachusetts.
That's probably right. Yeah, and I would guess that's how they're going to view it in the long run too, right?
For sure. And the private sector line that Obama made last week is obviously going to stick.
Yeah.
I mean, they're using it now, and we'll use it
That was quite an effective ad, I think. I mean, that just because it, juxtaposing those news stories with how bad the economy is with the president, who again, however you take these things out of context, and of course it was taken out of context, but every politician, every time they speak, are having things taken out of context. That was quite effective.
But the reason that was a good ad, I think, is that it uses commentators, various people outside of the process, and Obama himself talking about something and making his own kind of screw up, versus the other one, which is just the typical kind of narrator saying a few things about a couple of statistics, which doesn't resonate with me.
I would take the whole thing back to where we started, though, which is I kind of think that the key here, maybe the only thing that really matters, is whether people get a sense that the real economy is doing a little better by, say, September. And I think the rest of this stuff may just all be background noise, because I think people are tuned into the real economy and they're making real judgments on whether it feels like there are jobs out there, and whether it feels like the guy next door is doing better, and whether my 401k is doing a little better. And it may be that the sort of the periphery stuff just doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, I looked at the tracking numbers of the last 5 elections. You look at where various races were in June. 3 of the times they were dramatically off. 2 of the times they were.
We mean dramatically different.
Different from what actually turned out in November. 2 were, actually reflected what happened in that November. This isn't the right moment.
That said, economies move very slowly. They're like great big ships at sea. They don't really turn around quickly. And I'm not saying the economy is headed into very, very rough waters, but it's clearly not headed in a good direction right now, and it would take something pretty remarkable, given the global environment, given how tough things are in Europe and Asia is slowing down, given the real worries there are about the fiscal position here, the fiscal cliff we're facing at the end of the year. It'd be pretty remarkable if the economy took a different course over the next 4 months, I think.
We'll leave it there. Long road. We're at the beginning, not the end. Thanks to you all. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us for the Wall Street Journal's DC Bureau every week. Next week, we'll be joined by Senator Marco Rubio.